All our lives, we were taught that hard work is the key to economic and professional success. However, the system rewards wealth and power over effort and labor. No matter how hard they try, 28% of informal workers in Latin America and the Caribbean remain poor. Even more outrageously, 16% of those who are fortunate enough to have formal jobs in the region also remain poor. Their legally approved salaries are not even enough to cover the minimum cost of living. Santos, a chicharron vendor from the Dominican Republic, tells us how he dedicates around 14 hours a day to his work. He starts at 6 a.m. by going to the market, but he tells us that some days, I don't even earn back what I invested. The system is designed to reward wealth and power, not work and effort, as our mothers taught us. This is why Oxfam's latest report, presented at the Davos Economic Forum, is titled Reward Work, Not Wealth, and once again demonstrates how this system is failing, at least for the vast majority. At Oxfam, we believe it is crucial to present these data and proposals in Davos. That is where business and political leaders gather, people who have the power to decide on the necessary changes to build a fairer and more equal system. Many of them are part of the problem, but they can, and must, also be part of the solution. Measuring wealth is not an easy task, as most governments lack data on their population's wealth. Banking secrecy prevents governments from accessing this information. Instead, financial institutions like Credit Suisse are the ones producing wealth data. Economic inequality data, usually produced by governments, analyze income based on household surveys. However, these surveys fail to capture the phenomenon of extreme inequality. Billionaires are so few compared to the rest of the population that surveys simply do not include them. If we consider the threshold of $30 million in net assets, according to the UBS and WealthX World Ultra Wealth Report, 2014, only 0.000025% of Latin America's population, 14,805 people, have assets exceeding $30 million. Renowned economists have raised this issue, not just as an academic debate, but because ignoring the extreme concentration of wealth leads to flawed public policies that fail to effectively reduce inequality and poverty. According to Forbes data, there are currently 2,043 billionaires worldwide, 9 out of 10 of whom are men. Last year saw the largest increase in billionaires in history, with a new billionaire emerging every 2 days. In just 12 months, this elite's wealth grew by $762 billion, a sum that could have ended extreme poverty in the world 7 times over. The main issue is the mechanisms that enable this concentration of wealth. As our executive director, Winnie Byanyama, states, the billionaire boom is not a sign of a thriving economy, but a symptom of a failing economic system. The people who make our clothes, assemble our phones, and grow our food are being exploited to ensure a constant supply of cheap products and to maximize corporate profits for wealthy investors. The richest 1% in Latin America and the Caribbean owns 37% of the region's wealth, while the poorest 50% has access to only 3.5%, according to the latest Credit Suisse report. Of all the wealth generated in the region last year alone, 95% went to the richest 10% of the population, while the poorest 300 million people lost $22 billion in assets during the same period. Latin America is characterized as the region where most wealth is tied to non-financial assets, mainly real estate and land, which make up 70% of total wealth. Oxfam's Desterados report estimates that the largest 1% of farms control more than half of the region's productive land. In other words, the top 1% of large estates occupies more territory than the remaining 99% of rural properties combined. The significance of land and wealth creation in Latin America means that policies addressing land ownership inequality are crucial for tackling overall inequality. In Limoilou, a settlement in Alto Paraná, Paraguay, Simona tells us, this is the only farming settlement left out of the 7 that were originally established in the area. With the soy boom, everything around us has turned into massive mechanized plantations, where they constantly spray herbicides and pesticides. If the men and women of Limoilou still resist on their land, it is due to the strength of their organization, not because institutions have cared about promoting their development. In 2017, according to Forbes, there were 89 billionaires in Latin America and the Caribbean, 16 of whom were women. Their total wealth amounted to $440 billion, a figure larger than the GDP of almost every country in the region except Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. Between 2016 and 2017, Latin American billionaires' wealth grew by $155 billion. Enough to eradicate monetary poverty in the region nearly twice over for an entire year. In 2015, Oxfam's inequality calculator estimated how many years a person from the poorest 10% of each Latin American country would need to work to earn what a billionaire in their country makes in a single month. Honduras, 603 years. Peru, 336 years. Colombia, 442 years. Yes, hundreds of years. That is how extreme the inequality gap is in the region. Is wealth the result of hard work? Work hard, put in the effort, and you'll achieve your dreams. Let's take a look at how billionaires made their fortunes. While many billionaires on Forbes' list have worked hard, been innovative, and had vision, it is also true that 1/3 of their wealth is inherited, and another 1/3 comes from monopolistic sectors like telecommunications, mining, construction, and pharmaceuticals, industries that heavily depend on public contracts and are often tied to political favors and clientelism. Carlos Slim, the sixth richest man in the world, amassed his fortune by exercising near-total monopoly control over Mexico's telecommunications sector. He controls 70% of Mexico's mobile phone market and 65% of its landlines. According to the OECD, between 2005 and 2009, the inefficiencies in Mexico's telecom sector resulted in a $129.2 billion loss in social welfare, equivalent to 1.8% of the country's annual GDP. The Odebrecht scandal, which shook the region, exposed how one of the world's largest construction firms operated, revealing a network of favors and corruption between private corporations and political parties, resulting in rigged contracts, outrageous bribes, campaign financing, and overpriced public works that robbed Latin Americans of their rights. Low wages ensure that no matter how hard workers try, they can never escape poverty, while corporate executives receive exorbitant salaries. The CEO of a major fashion brand like H&M or Zara earns in 4 days what a Bangladeshi garment worker, who sews their clothes, earns in her entire lifetime. Currently, companies prioritize shareholder dividends over everything else. Corporate profits are increasingly distributed to shareholders instead of being used to improve workers' conditions or reinvest in the company's long-term growth. For example, in 1970, UK companies distributed 10% of profits to shareholders. Today, they take 70%. In Latin America, minimum wages often fail to cover basic living costs. 16% of formal workers still earn wages that keep them below the poverty line. These legally approved starvation wages are justified under the pretext of stimulating employment, yet that stimulus never arrives. In the Dominican Republic, 79% of workers who contribute to Social Security earn less than the cost of the basic food basket. If hard work were rewarded, women would be billionaires. Women contribute $10 trillion to the global economy through unpaid care work, taking care of children, the elderly, household chores, and food preparation. In Peru, it is estimated that unpaid work accounts for 20% of the country's GDP. Women in the region dedicate many hours each day to these tasks, twice as much as men. These tasks are linked to love and affection for their families, which is why they are not paid. In Guatemala and Mexico, time use surveys show that women work an average of 7 hours a day caring for others without receiving any remuneration. And, as is evident, when you work 7 hours a day caring for your family, your chances of entering the paid labor market are almost zero. Even when caregiving work is paid, it is undervalued and therefore very poorly compensated, often under extreme working conditions. A formal cleaning worker tells us they believe that someone who cleans is not a professional. It's someone who didn't study. And to them, someone who didn't study is like a dog, they treat them badly. Maria Cristina Lopez, who is originally from Guatemala but more Mexican than anything, believes that if I had studied, I would be a congresswoman. I mean, the way I am, I would be a congresswoman, but unfortunately, I didn't study. I didn't have opportunities, because maybe I could have been Rigoberta Menchú. What Maria Cristina doesn't know is that women in Latin America are already more educated than men. We have, on average, one more year of schooling. Yet, that has not been enough to break the glass ceiling, as women still earn 16% less than men. The largest wage gap exists among men and women with the highest levels of education, where women continue to earn 25% less than men. Moreover, 78% of employed women work in low-productivity sectors, such as agriculture, compared to 55% of men. Latin America has been both a good and a bad example in the fight against inequality. The policies implemented in the region in the 1990s, led by the Washington Consensus, cut public spending to pay off acquired debt, while also deregulating labor markets and reducing taxes. These measures placed the region's countries at the highest levels of poverty and inequality ever recorded. Since the year 2000, this trend has reversed. The boom in commodity prices and greater political will from governments helped develop public policies that increased labor incomes, boosted social investment, focused programs on the poorest populations, and implemented social protection programs. Monetary poverty and inequality decreased significantly, proving that these were not unavoidable evils. When there is political will, the gaps can be reduced. Unfortunately, the reduction of income inequality has slowed considerably, and the good news about poverty has already faded. In 2014, 28.5% of the region's population was in poverty. By 2016, that number had risen to 30.7%. During the same period, extreme poverty increased from 9% to 10.2%. The response of current governments to economic slowdowns and legitimacy crises, often caused by corruption scandals, has been to rely on the same failed strategy from the 1990s: austerity and shrinking the state. Extreme measures, such as Brazil's constitutional amendment in December 2016 imposing a 20-year cap on social investment spending, will only worsen the situation for the poor and middle class. As Santos puts it, those people have their money. The rich don't need this, it's us, the needy, who do. A study conducted by UNESCO, Oxfam Brazil, and the Center for Economic and Social Rights, Human Rights in Times of Austerity, highlights the effects of these cuts. The federal budget for food security programs fell by 55% in 2017, raising concerns about increased malnutrition and hunger. The budget for the Popular Pharmacy Program, which supplies essential medicines to low-income populations through a network of public pharmacies, was reduced by 15%, leading to the closure of 314 pharmacies, mostly in the poorest regions. Whenever resources are lacking, the usual response is to cut social spending, and few countries consider the possibility of increasing revenue by making the richest pay more taxes. As Katia Maia, executive director of Oxfam Brazil, explains, fighting tax evasion could generate resources of around 275 billion Brazilian reals, almost twice the federal government's deficit in 2016. A progressive tax reform, focusing on higher incomes, could generate additional resources of around 60 billion Brazilian reals while also helping to reduce Brazil's extreme economic inequality. In the current system, tax avoidance is legal, while the exploitation of workers is considered efficiency, and maximizing investor returns at any cost is seen as good business practice. This is an economic system that does not work, but changing it is merely a matter of political will. The business and political leaders gathered in Davos can move from rhetoric to action and change this reality. They can play a key role by ensuring that both they and their companies pay the taxes they owe. Governments can increase and improve public services. Companies can impose limits on shareholder and executive returns to ensure that all workers receive a decent wage. They could also refrain from using their money and connections to seek political favors that give them an unfair advantage. Perhaps these measures would help change the opinion of the 75% of Latin Americans who, according to Latinobarometro, believe that in our democracies, governments serve only a select group of powerful elites. I think those people, governments, need to think better and know what they are going to do so that we are all equal. It doesn't look right, some people eating while others don't, says Santos as he prepares to sell chicharrones to keep surviving. And if you liked our content, please subscribe and like this video. Remember, it's free, and by doing so, you help us continue creating quality content for you. See you soon.